Picture this. You walk into a room confident about what you saw, what you heard, and what you felt. Yet within minutes, someone twists your memory, questions your perception, and leaves you doubting your own reality. That's not confusion, it's gaslighting. Gaslighting is not just lying. It is lying with strategy, with patience, and with precision. It doesn't simply distort facts, it corrodes the foundation of how you interpret facts, making you mistrust your own mind. The term comes from a 1938 play called Gaslight, where a husband dims the lights and insists to his wife that nothing has changed. She begins to question her sanity, trapped in the psychological cage he has built. The play is old, but the weapon is timeless. Machiavelli never used the word gaslighting, but he understood its mechanics better than anyone. He wrote that rulers who can control perception control power, because reality itself is irrelevant if the people no longer believe their own eyes. This is the essence of gaslighting. The war is not fought on the battlefield, but in your mind. It does not destroy your body, it erodes your certainty, and once certainty is gone, you are defenseless. A manipulator who gaslights doesn't want to convince you, they want to confuse you. They don't want you to trust them completely, they want you to distrust yourself. The moment you second-guess your own memory, they have won. Notice the brilliance of this tactic. Chains can be broken, walls can be climbed, but when the prison is inside your mind, there is nowhere to escape. That's why gaslighting is one of the most insidious tools of psychological warfare. Let's dissect how it works. Gaslighting usually begins subtly. A denial here, a dismissal there. The gaslighter tells you that never happened or you're overreacting. Small phrases repeated often slowly chip away at your confidence. Then comes minimization. It wasn't that big of a deal. You're being dramatic. Here, the gaslighter doesn't outright deny reality, but they shrink its importance until you feel foolish for caring. You start wondering if you are, in fact, overreacting. Projection is another weapon. They accuse you of doing the very thing they're guilty of. They cheat, but say you're untrustworthy. They manipulate, but accuse you of playing games. Your instinct tells you something is off, but their accusations twist the mirror until you see yourself as the problem. Another tactic is rewriting history. I never said that. You must be misremembering. They speak with such conviction that you begin to doubt your memory. Human recollection is fragile, and once you question it, they slide their narrative into the cracks. Gaslighting thrives in uncertainty. When you argue, they shift the topic. When you point out facts, they attack your tone. When you ask for clarity, they drown you in words until you're too exhausted to push back. It's not about logic, it's about destabilization. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance fatigue. When your brain constantly struggles between what you experience and what you're told, it drains your energy. Eventually, silence feels easier than resistance. That silence is the manipulator's victory. Why does it work so well? Because humans crave social approval. From childhood, we are trained to trust authority, to avoid conflict, and to question ourselves more than others. Gaslighters exploit this programming like hackers exploiting old software. Machiavelli warned that appearances often matter more than truth. A prince can survive being hated if he maintains the illusion of legitimacy. Likewise, a gaslighter doesn't need to erase reality, they only need to make you doubt whether your version of it is legitimate. Think of it this way. In chess, the most powerful piece isn't the queen, it's the perception of the queen. If you believe she dominates the board, you adjust your play accordingly. Gaslighting is psychological chess. It's less about facts, more about controlling how you move. Let's go deeper. Gaslighting usually follows a cycle. First, the incident the gaslighter does or says something harmful. Then comes denial or distortion. They insist it didn't happen or that it happened differently. After that, they attack your stability. You're imagining things. You're crazy. Finally, they extend false reassurance. I'm only saying this because I care about you. That cycle traps victims because it mixes cruelty with comfort. The brain latches onto moments of reassurance, dismissing the abuse as an overreaction. But make no mistake, this cycle is engineered to keep you dependent and doubting. Gaslighting doesn't always roar, it whispers. It shows up in workplaces when a boss denies giving instructions, then blames you for failing. It shows up in families when someone insists your childhood memories are wrong. It shows up in politics when leaders dismiss undeniable facts as fake news. The brilliance is that gaslighting makes resistance look irrational. If you fight back, you appear angry. A master manipulator doesn't argue to discover the truth, he argues to rewrite it. He doesn't need you to agree, he only needs you to hesitate, to pause, to wonder if maybe you're wrong. That hesitation is the wedge that lets him pry open your mind. Gaslighting's genius is that it doesn't break you at once. It chips away small blow after small blow until your certainty collapses. What begins as defending yourself in one conversation becomes questioning yourself in every conversation. Let's map the battlefield. The first tactic is denial. A gaslighter flatly rejects what happened. I never said that. That didn't happen. Spoken with confidence, denial makes you doubt memory because memory is fragile and confidence is contagious. The second tactic is minimization. Even when caught, they shrink the harm. You're exaggerating. You're too sensitive. By making you feel guilty for caring, they redirect the blame onto you. Suddenly, the problem is not what they did, it's that you reacted. The third tactic is diversion. You raise an issue and they change the subject. We're not talking about me, we're talking about your attitude. The heat leaves their actions and falls onto your flaws. You entered the conversation holding evidence. You leave it carrying guilt. Then comes projection. They accuse you of doing exactly what they're doing. They lie and call you dishonest. They manipulate and call you controlling. This works because the mind naturally defends itself, so instead of focusing on their behavior, you burn energy defending your reputation. And perhaps the deadliest tactic, confusing contradiction. They'll say one thing today, the opposite tomorrow, and insist both are true. This inconsistency keeps you off balance because the brain craves patterns. Without consistency, you chase clarity instead of noticing control. Now, let's step into real-world scenarios where gaslighting thrives. Imagine a partner who cheats but denies it with conviction. You find messages, but they insist you misunderstood. You catch inconsistencies, but they cry and say you're paranoid. Soon, you're apologizing for even questioning them. They're guilty, but you're the one begging for forgiveness. Or picture arguments where your partner says that never happened despite you recalling every detail. At first you insist, then you doubt. Eventually you avoid conflict altogether. The relationship doesn't silence you, they teach you to silence yourself. Machiavelli would recognize this as soft tyranny. A ruler doesn't always need force, he only needs to make resistance feel futile. In relationships, the gaslighter rules not through violence but through your fear of losing love. Gaslighting also creeps into friendships. A toxic friend dismisses your achievements. It's not that big of a deal. They mock your insecurities, then claim, I was only joking. When you confront them, they say, you're too sensitive. Over time, you stop trusting your feelings. This is how loyalty gets weaponized. The gaslighter knows you value the friendship, so they exploit it. You give them the benefit of the doubt, and they take it as permission to reshape your reality. Machiavelli would warn, loyalty is the easiest weakness to exploit. Betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from those closest to you, those who know how to twist your trust into chains. Workplaces. Gaslighting is rampant in offices. A boss gives you vague instructions, then blames you when results don't match their unstated expectations. I never told you to do it that way. They did, but now the story changes. Colleagues can gaslight too. They take credit for your ideas, then insist you never contributed. They spread subtle rumors, then call you paranoid for noticing. In time, you wonder if you're imagining hostility. Why does gaslighting thrive at work? Because jobs create dependency. You need income, stability, reputation. The gaslighter knows this, and so they twist your perception not only of them, but of yourself as a professional. Machiavelli would say, the workplace is a miniature principality. Power doesn't always belong to the most skilled, but to the most strategic. The gaslighter wins not by doing the work, but by controlling the story of who did the work. Politics and propaganda. On the grand stage, gaslighting becomes propaganda. Leaders deny what everyone saw, dismiss scandals as fabrications, or repeat falsehoods until they sound like truths. Citizens begin to doubt not only their leaders, but their own judgment. Think of regimes that deny atrocities, calling them exaggerations or enemy propaganda. Think of politicians who contradict themselves daily, yet insist they've always been consistent. When the public is bombarded with contradictions, exhaustion sets in. People stop resisting, not because they believe, but because they're tired. Machiavelli would nod here. He wrote that perception governs politics more than truth. A ruler doesn't need to be virtuous, he only needs to appear virtuous. Gaslighting elevates this principle. Facts don't matter if people doubt their memory of facts. Family systems. Gaslighting often begins in childhood. A parent ignores your emotions, insisting you're fine when you're not, or they rewrite history. We never treated you that way, despite your vivid memories. Slowly, you grow into an adult who questions every instinct. Generational gaslighting is the most dangerous because it becomes identity. Children learn to silence themselves before they even know they're being silenced. By adulthood, the prison is so familiar it feels like home. Machiavelli would say this is the foundation of obedience. A ruler wants compliant citizens. A parent who gaslights unintentionally trains them. If you learn to distrust yourself early, you'll carry that pattern into every relationship. But let's pause and ask, why do manipulators gaslight in the first place? At its core, gaslighting is about control. Some do it consciously, wielding lies like weapons. Others do it unconsciously, unable to face their own flaws. Denial becomes easier than guilt. But regardless of intent, the effect is the same. You lose certainty, they gain power. Another reason, gaslighting buys time. A partner denies cheating to keep you from leaving. A leader denies corruption to survive scandal. A boss denies instructions to avoid accountability. Gaslighting doesn't need to be permanent. It just needs to delay consequences long enough to benefit the manipulator. Gaslighting also isolates. Victims often stop sharing experiences, fearing others will call them dramatic. This silence cuts them off from external validation. Alone, they're easier to control. Machiavelli would admire this. Divide the subject from allies, and the ruler's grip tightens. And here's the most brutal truth. Gaslighting is addictive for the manipulator. Once they see how easily doubt reshapes reality, they return to the tactic again and again. Control is a drug, and gaslighting is their supply. Now, let's examine the psychological effects. Victims often develop self-doubt, second-guessing even minor decisions. They may experience anxiety, living in constant fear of being wrong. Some develop depression, losing belief in their own worth. In extreme cases, they may even experience dissociation, detaching from reality because it feels safer than constant doubt. This erosion of self is the gaslighter's ultimate victory. They don't just want to win arguments, they want to rewrite your identity. Once you no longer trust yourself, you'll trust them. That if gaslighting is the art of destabilization, defense is the art of anchoring. The gaslighter wants you to drift in fog. Your survival depends on building ground under your feet. Once you reclaim certainty, their illusions lose power. The first weapon is documentation. Write things down, record conversations, keep evidence. Gaslighting thrives in the gaps of memory, so close the gaps. When they say, "I never said that," you no longer rely on fragile recall, you have proof. But defense is not only external, it is internal. The gaslighter attacks your trust in yourself. To counter this, practice pattern recognition. Don't get lost in single incidents. Instead, observe the recurring tactics: denial, minimization, projection. Repetition reveals the strategy. Detach emotionally in the moment. When manipulation begins, resist the instinct to argue endlessly. Silence is your shield. Machiavelli taught that timing is everything. Don't answer on their schedule. Slow the tempo. Control when and how you respond. Another strategy: validate with allies. Seek trusted people outside the manipulator's circle. Share experiences and ask, "Did this happen the way I remember?" Gaslighters isolate you. Allies reconnect you to reality. Your support system is your fortress. Yet the deepest defense is detachment from approval. The gaslighter feeds on your desire to be liked, believed, or validated. When you no longer need their acceptance, you break their chain. Machiavelli would say, "He who depends on another's favor is already conquered." Learn to spot the emotional hooks. Guilt, pity, and fear are the gaslighter's lures. When you feel the sudden urge to prove yourself, pause, ask, "Whose game am I playing right now?" Awareness transforms compulsion into choice. Boundaries are not optional, they are essential. Refuse to argue endlessly, refuse to answer accusations that are designed only to confuse. Machiavelli wrote that fortresses sometimes weaken rulers, but for individuals, psychological fortresses are vital. A wall of limits keeps predators out. And here is a subtle but powerful tactic. Mirror their strategy back at them, not by manipulation, but by clarity. When they deny, you repeat calmly, "I heard what I heard." When they minimize, you state, "It mattered to me." You don't fight their frame, you refuse to step inside it. Gaslighters thrive on reactions. Every angry outburst, every desperate plea, every attempt to prove yourself is food for them. The strongest move is often non-reaction. Like Machiavelli's ideal prince, you become unreadable, untouchable, unmoved. Rebuild your self-trust through small victories. Decide something minor, what to wear, what to eat, and honor it. Confidence is muscle, repetition strengthens it. Over time, you stop outsourcing validation. Your word becomes enough. Remember, gaslighting collapses when the victim becomes unplayable. The manipulator's entire game is prediction. If they cannot predict your doubt, they cannot control your perception. In unpredictability, you regain sovereignty. Consider also the tactic of external anchors. Use journals, recordings, even therapy to create mirrors outside the gaslighter's influence. Anchors ground you when the manipulator shakes the earth beneath your feet. But defense is not just personal, it's strategic. In workplaces, document emails and meetings. In politics, rely on multiple news sources. In families, set limits on contact. In relationships, notice when reassurance feels more like a leash than a comfort. Machiavelli would stress realism. Not every battle is worth fighting. Sometimes defense means disengagement. If a manipulator cannot be changed, your best strategy is withdrawal. Survival is victory. Walking away is sovereignty. Yet leaving is often the hardest move. Gaslighters weave dependency. They convince you that without them you're lost. Here's the truth. Without them you rediscover yourself. The prison door was always unlocked. You only needed to stop believing their illusion. Defense also means reframing identity. You are not fragile because you were gaslighted. You are aware because you saw it. Awareness is rare. Most remain blind. To see manipulation clearly is not weakness. It's power. And power is the antidote to manipulation. When you trust your perceptions, you move differently. You speak with clarity. You no longer chase explanations. You enforce boundaries. That shift alone breaks the gaslighter's spell. Machiavelli observed that those who cannot control themselves are controlled by others. Gaslighting tests this principle. Defend your perception, defend your emotions, and you defend your sovereignty. Lose them, and you hand over your crown. So train detachment like a weapon. Journal daily. Anchor your reality. Build circles of validation. Limit exposure to manipulators. And above all, stop negotiating your truth with those invested in erasing it. When someone tells you you're imagining things, you answer, "I trust my perception." When they say you're too sensitive, you reply, "My sensitivity is not your weapon." When they say that never happened, you calmly respond, "It happened for me." The point is not to convince them. The point is to remind yourself. Defense is not about changing the gaslighter. It's about refusing to let them change you. Think of the sovereign state. Machiavelli advised rulers to secure borders, control information, and project strength. Apply this inward, secure your mind, control your narrative, project self-trust. You become a fortress the gaslighter cannot penetrate. And here lies the ultimate victory: indifference. The gaslighter's greatest fear is irrelevance. When their words no longer shake you, when their denial no longer rattles you, when their projection no longer hooks you, you've won. Gaslighting only works on those who still crave approval, who still fear disapproval, who still believe they must explain themselves. Once you kill that hunger, you become untouchable. This is the Machiavellian endgame. You stop being their victim and become their mirror.